Welcome back. Let's talk about individual items now when it comes to CSS Grid. Because up until now, we've just used this container and performed operations or changed views to all the items. But what if we wanted a bit of a funky grid system that has different sizes? In that case, we can just select individual items within this container. If we go back to our HTML page, we see that we have these zones, but each zone has different color. So let's use one of these colors, for example, green, which we have 2 of, to have some special CSS Grid properties. So let's have a green class. And I'm just going to do it up here instead of at the bottom so we can keep all the CSS Grid things at the top. Now, for individual items, I can say something like grid column and say what we wanted to do in terms of the column grid system. And the way this works is we can give it where it should start and where it should end. What does that mean? Well, if I do grid column start and I say 1 and then have grid column end and I give it 2 and I refresh the page, nothing changes. What if I do grid column 3 and I refresh? Whoa, what just happened here? In order for us to understand what these numbers mean, let's open up the developer tools once again. I'm going to select the items. And as we'll see over here, we see that we have a grid zone. And this fox is now taking up 2 grid spaces. In the way CSS Grid works, it has a numbering system where the first line over here is 1. The second line over here is 2. And then this is 3. Let's just make this a little bit bigger to show you. That's better. We now have 3 grid systems or 3 grid items. We have 1 here when the first one begins, 2 where the second one begins, and then 3 where the third one begins. So what we're saying here is that when it comes to columns, start at 1, which is right over here, and then end at 3. So that if I do 4 here and I refresh, you see that it now covers the entire length. But as soon as we make it a little bit bigger, well, it only is going to cover the 1, 2, 3, up to 4. And if we make it a little bit smaller, you see that because we said 1 to 4, it doesn't actually make it as responsive as it was before, and it actually extends to make sure that it fills in 1 to 4. And there's a shorthand way of doing this. Instead of saying grid column start and grid column end, we can just say grid column and then give it the start number and then slash the end number. So that if I refresh, you see that it's the same thing. Let's make this a little bit bigger. And let's just do 3 here just to keep it small. And I'm going to close this. And we see that our grid items now have, well, this looks pretty good actually. We have the green classes that span over more grids. Now, a trick here is that sometimes we just simply don't know what the user is going to see. And we might want this to span the entire length without having, the rabbit come in and then the frog and the lion come in. And we can actually do at the end here something like -1, which means all the way till the end. If I refresh here, there we go, and make this larger and smaller, we see that we're saying start at 1 and then keep going all the way until the end. In CSS Grid, -1 signifies the end of the viewport. So that now we see that we have a nice responsive grid again that just adjusts according to our viewport. Very, very cool. Now, sometimes we don't really know how many grids we're going to have on our page. And we also might not necessarily want it to span it all across from beginning to end. So a useful syntax here is to do something like span, which says span across 2 grids. If I refresh here, you see that green is spanning across 2 grids. If I do 3, it's going to span across 3 grids. And as you can imagine, the default is span 1, spanning across 1. But the interesting thing about this is if I do, let's say, span 2, and I refresh, as this gets smaller, you see that it's always going to span across to make sure that it covers whatever the 2 grids are, which is, once again, very useful. Finally, we can also do the same thing with rows. If we do grid rows or grid row, I can say, well, we want it to span to start at, let's say, 1 and end at 3. If I refresh here, look at that. Whoa, what just happened here? Well, let's take a look. We started 1 and ended 3. And because green is also this unicorn over here, it automatically moved it all the way up because we wanted to start at 1 as well. And remember, our grid system now is row, and if I open the developer tools and select the grid, 1 starts here, then 2, then 3 right here where it ends. So you have to be careful with the positioning here that this is going to move whatever it needs to all the way up to 1. But we're able to move things around and adjust the rows as well. Very, very cool. Our grid system is starting to look really, really nice. Let's do a bit more in the next video.